I used to think that love conquered all, until I caught my husband Victor in our bed with my friend Margot. That night changed everything. He didn't even try to hide it anymore. Instead, he laughed at my tears and told me he wanted a divorce. Victor, the man I helped build an empire for, the man whose dreams I put before my own, called me weak and worthless to my face. He froze our accounts, spread rumors about my mental health, and offered me pennies for 10 years of marriage. At ASEAN, a board meeting for the company we built together, he announced his engagement to Margot while I sat there, humiliated. Everyone thought I would break. My husband thought I was too weak to fight back. He had no idea what was coming for him. I never expected to find another woman in my bed. Not after 10 years of marriage, not after everything I had sacrificed. For Victor's dreams. But there they were, tangled in our Egyptian cotton sheets that I had carefully selected to match our master bedroom's color scheme. My husband and Margot, his marketing director. My friend. At least, I had thought she was my friend. I stood in the doorway, frozen. The bouquet of lilies I had brought home from my business trip slipped from my fingers, but neither of them heard the soft thud against our plush carpet. They were too lost in each other, too consumed by their betrayal. I should have screamed. I should have thrown something. Instead, I quietly closed the door and retreated downstairs to the kitchen of our sprawling penthouse apartment. The apartment Victor could never have afforded if I hadn't introduced him to the investors who gave him his first real chance. My hands trembled as I poured myself a glass of water. How long had this been going on? Had everyone known except me? All those late nights at the office, the business trips that extended over weekends, the times he told me not to wait up. Had I been so blind, so trusting? A memory surfaced of our wedding day. Victor looking into my eyes as he promised to love only me until death parted us. I had believed him entirely. I had not just been his wife. I had been his partner in every sense. When Victor had nothing but ambitious dreams, I was the one who believed in him. I left my promising career in finance to help him build sterling properties from the ground up. I planned the parties where he made his crucial connections. I edited his proposals, refined his pitches, managed his image. I was the one who suggested expanding into commercial real estate when the residential market cooled. I was the invisible foundation of his success. And now he was throwing me away. The laughter from upstairs had stopped. I heard footsteps, the shower running. I considered leaving before they came down, avoiding the confrontation. But no. This was my home too. I would not be the one to slink away in shame. 20 minutes later, Victor entered the kitchen first, hair wet, wearing fresh clothes. He froze when he saw me sitting at the island counter, my untouched glass of water before me. "Elena," he said, recovering quickly. "You're home early." "Clearly," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Is she coming down, or does she sneak out the back like the mistresses in movies?" His face hardened. The charming mask he wore in public, the one that had seduced countless property owners into selling at his terms, slipped away. "Don't be dramatic." "Dramatic?" I repeated. "I just found my husband in bed with another woman, and I'm being dramatic?" "This isn't how I wanted you to find out," Victor said, not even attempting to deny it. "But this has been a long time coming, Elena. You and I both know our marriage has been over for years." His words struck me like physical blows. Our anniversary, dinner, had been just last month. He had given me diamond earrings and told me how lucky he was to have me. "I want a divorce," he continued, his voice cold and businesslike. "I've already spoken to my lawyers. They'll be contacting you." I stared at him, this stranger who wore my husband's face. "How long have you been planning this?" He shrugged, opening the refrigerator as if we were discussing something as trivial as dinner plans. "Does it matter? It's done." "And Margot? How long has she been warming your bed?" Victor's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Margot understands me. She appreciates my vision. She doesn't try to change me." The implication was clear. I had become an inconvenience, a relic of his humble beginnings. He had outgrown me. "I've made some financial arrangements," he continued. "You'll receive a fair settlement." "Fair?" My voice finally broke. What exactly is fair compensation for a decade of my life, Victor? For all the work I've put into your company? He laughed then, a sound so cruel it made me flinch. Your work? Elena, let's be honest. You've been a lovely ornament on my arm. But Sterling Properties is mine. I built it. I've been generous allowing you to play at being a businesswoman, but let's not pretend you've been anything more than my wife. I couldn't breathe. Every moment I had spent poring over contracts, every networking event where I had charmed potential investors while he closed deals, every late night spent brainstorming solutions to problems he brought home, all erased with a few dismissive words. You've already been removed from the company accounts, he added casually, and I've had your things moved to the guest bedroom for now. You can stay there until you find somewhere else. The casual cruelty of it stunned me. He had planned every detail of discarding me, like I was nothing more than an outdated piece of furniture. Before I could respond, Margot appeared in the doorway. She at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, though not sorry. Elena, she said softly, I never meant for you to find out this way. How exactly did you mean for me to find out? You were sleeping with my husband? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Victor moved protectively toward her. That's enough, Elena. The situation is what it is. I suggest you start thinking about your future rather than making a scene. My future, I repeated numbly. Yes, he said, his tone softening slightly as if he were being kind. You're smart enough, Elena. You'll land on your feet. But Sterling Properties is no longer your concern. 3 days later, I sat in the Sterling Properties boardroom, still in shock. Victor had demanded my presence for what he called a proper transition. I had spent the intervening days moving between disbelief, crushing grief, and moments of white-hot rage. I had barely slept, barely eaten. The woman who entered that boardroom was a ghost of herself, exactly as Victor had planned. The board members were all there, men who had dined in our home, who had kissed my cheek and complimented my taste. They avoided my eyes now as Victor stood at the head of the table, radiating confidence. I've called this special meeting to address some changes in the company structure, he announced. As you all know, Sterling Properties is preparing for its biggest development yet, what I'm calling my legacy project. The Sterling Tower will redefine the city skyline and set new standards for luxury commercial real estate. Murmurs of approval rippled around the table. The project had been my idea originally, a way to diversify their portfolio and ensure sustainable growth. To ensure the success of this venture, Victor continued, I've had to make some difficult personal decisions. He glanced at me with practiced sympathy. Elena and I are divorcing. It's been a challenging time, but we both agree it's for the best. I sat frozen, listening to him rewrite our history in real time. Additionally, he said, his face brightening, I have some happier news to share. I'm pleased to announce my engagement to Margot Wilson, who many of you know has been instrumental to our marketing success. Margot entered on cue, beaming as she took her place beside Victor. She reached for his hand as the men around the table offered congratulations, their earlier discomfort forgotten in the excitement of fresh gossip. I sat there, invisible, as Victor systematically erased my contributions and replaced me in a matter of minutes. When the meeting concluded, I rose on unsteady legs to leave, feeling everyone's eyes on my back. Elena, Victor called, his voice carrying the false concern he used when he wanted to appear magnanimous. We hope you understand this is just business. No hard feelings. I didn't turn around. I couldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing my tears. But as I walked out of the boardroom, I heard the whispers start. Poor Elena. Always a bit unstable. Victor had been so patient with her. Thank goodness he finally found someone worthy of him. I stumbled to the elevator, my vision blurring, my heart hammering in my chest. My husband thought I was too weak to fight back. Everyone thought I would break. And in that moment, I was broken. But they would all learn what happens when you break a woman who has spent her life putting others first. Something new emerges from the fragments. Something they would never see coming. Jasmine found me sitting in my car in the Sterling Properties parking garage 2 hours after the board meeting. I had driven down to the lowest level where no one would see me and fallen apart completely, ugly sobs racking my body until I could barely breathe. "Elena," she said, opening my car door and kneeling beside me. "Come home with me. You shouldn't be alone right now." Jasmine had been my friend since college, before Victor, before I became Mrs. Sterling. She was the only person who had called to check on me after Victor had told everyone I needed space to deal with some personal issues. His careful euphemism for the mental breakdown he wanted them all to believe I was having. I let her drive me to her modest apartment across town, so different from the sterile luxury I had grown accustomed to. Her place was cluttered with books and colorful throw pillows, walls covered with photographs from her travels. It felt lived in, warm in a way my own home had not for years. "You can stay as long as you need," she said, setting a cup of tea before me. No questions asked. But the questions came anyway, in the dead of night when sleep eluded me. How had I not seen this coming? Had I been so focused on building Victor's dream that I had become blind to his contempt? Had I wasted 10 years of my life on a man who had never truly seen me? I spent the first week at Jasmine's barely functioning. I moved between her spare bedroom and the living room sofa, watching mindless television and jumping whenever my phone buzzed with notifications. Victor hadn't called, not once, but his presence was everywhere else. Friends and acquaintances sent awkward messages of sympathy that felt more like pity. Business associates suddenly remembered long-standing appointments when I suggested meeting for coffee. "He's telling people you had some kind of breakdown," Jasmine told me gently one evening, scrolling through her phone. "Caroline from the Chamber of Commerce called me to see if you were okay. She said Victor told them you've been struggling with your mental health for months and the divorce was for your own good." I stared at her, momentarily speechless with rage. "He's making me sound crazy, so no one will believe anything I say about him or the company." Jasmine nodded grimly. "Classic gaslighting. And it's working. People are treating this whole thing like it's some sad but inevitable conclusion. Like he's the long-suffering husband who finally had to save himself." My phone pinged with an email notification. It was from a real estate listing service I had subscribed to years ago. The featured property made my stomach drop. Our dream house, the one I had spent years designing in my head, was now being built. The hillside property with the perfect view that Victor had promised would be our forever home once the company reached a certain milestone. I clicked through the preliminary renderings with growing horror. It was my design down to the smallest detail. The wraparound porch, the wall of windows facing the sunrise, the open concept kitchen I had sketched on countless napkins and notepads. Even the Japanese maple placed exactly where I had always imagined it. "What is it?" Jasmine asked, noticing my expression. I handed her my phone wordlessly. "Is that my house?" I whispered. "He's building my house for her." The listing described it as a visionary new project from Sterling Properties and announced a private housewarming gala for select guests once construction completed in 6 months. Something inside me, some last thread of hope that there had been any real love in our marriage, snapped. Victor hadn't just replaced me, he had stolen my dreams to give to another woman. The divorce papers arrived the next day, delivered by a courier who looked embarrassed to hand them to me. I waited until I was alone to open the thick envelope. Victor was offering me a one-time settlement of $500,000. It sounded generous until you considered the company was now worth over $100 million. There was no alimony, no ongoing support, and certainly no share in Sterling Properties. The document repeatedly emphasized my status as an uninvolved spouse with no claim to business assets. I called a lawyer, an older woman named Diana Martin who specialized in high-net-worth divorces. She reviewed the documents while I sat in her office, trying not to fidget. "This is insulting," she said finally, setting the papers down with distaste. "He's hiding assets. The company valuation he's claiming is ridiculously low. Can we fight it?" I asked. Diana sighed, removing her reading glasses. "We can try, but I should warn you, Victor Sterling has considerable influence in this town. He's got the top divorce attorney in the state on retainer, and from what I'm hearing, he's been moving assets around for months, preparing for this. So he wins," I said flatly. "I didn't say that," Diana replied. "But this will be expensive and potentially very ugly. He'll drag out every personal detail, use your current emotional state against you. The smear campaign he's already started is just the beginning. She leaned forward, her expression softening. Elena, I've seen this before. Men like your husband, they don't just want to win the divorce. They want to erase you, make it seem like their success was inevitable and theirs alone. They can't stand the idea that they owe anything to anyone, especially a wife. I felt tears threatening again. So what do I do? That depends on what you want, Diana said. If you just want out, we can probably negotiate a slightly better settlement. But if you want justice, that's a much harder path. Justice. The word echoed in my mind. What would justice even look like? After such a complete betrayal? I need to think about it, I told her. That night, I hit rock bottom. Jasmine was out on a date, and I was alone in her apartment with my thoughts and a bottle of wine I shouldn't have opened. I scrolled through social media, torturing myself with glimpses of my old life. Victor had already updated his relationship status. Former friends had migrated to his side of the divorce, leaving cheerful comments on his posts as if I had never existed. Then I saw the invitation. The housewarming for my dream home had become a formal event. Join us as we begin our new chapter, the digital card proclaimed over a rendering of my house, the house that should have been mine. I hurled my phone across the room and collapsed onto the floor, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. Everything I had built, everything I had dreamed of, had been taken from me. Victor had orchestrated my complete erasure, turning me into nothing more than an unfortunate chapter in his success story. I cried until there was nothing left, until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen shut. I cried for the naive girl who had believed in love, for the woman who had silenced her own ambitions to nurture her husband's, for all the years I would never get back. And then, in the still quiet hours before dawn, something shifted inside me. The tears stopped. The crushing weight on my chest eased. I sat up slowly, breathing deeply for what felt like the first time in weeks. I made my way to the bathroom and stared at the stranger in the mirror. My face was puffy from crying, my hair unwashed and tangled. I looked exactly like the unstable, pitiful ex-wife Victor wanted everyone to see. No more, I whispered to my reflection. I showered, washing away the salt of dried tears. I combed my hair, applied moisturizer to my blotchy skin, small acts of self-care that felt like declarations of war. Victor thought I was broken. He thought I would accept the scraps he offered and fade quietly into obscurity. He had underestimated me in every possible way. If he wanted to erase me, he should have been more thorough. He had forgotten how much I knew, how deeply I had been involved in every aspect of Sterling Properties. He had forgotten that before I became his wife, I had been a promising financial analyst with a keen eye for detail and a nearly photographic memory. Most dangerously, he had forgotten that he had taught me himself that in business, as in war, you should always know your opponent's weaknesses better than they know their own. By morning, I had made up my mind. I would not go quietly. I would not play the role of victim in Victor's carefully constructed narrative. This was not the end of my story. It was only the beginning. I began with something simple, a spreadsheet. In my finance days, I had believed there was no problem that couldn't be organized, analyzed, and solved with the right spreadsheet. So I created one for the ruins of my life. I documented everything I could remember about Victor's business dealings from the past decade. Properties acquired, partnerships formed, decisions made behind closed doors. I noted which ideas had been mine, which contacts I had nurtured, which problems I had solved when Victor was stuck. I wasn't sure how this information would help me yet, but it felt good to reclaim my contributions, even if only for myself. Next, I retrieved my laptop from the penthouse while Victor was at work. It contained years of emails between us, files I had created for the company, and photographs from countless business events. I had always been meticulous about backing up important information, a habit Victor had often teased me about. That caution was paying off now. Looking through these digital artifacts of my marriage was painful but necessary. It was like examining the scene of an accident to understand what had gone wrong. I found email threads where Victor had asked for my input on major decisions, documents with tracked changes showing my revisions to his proposals, photographs where I stood beside him as he shook hands with influential people I had introduced him to. There was an entire history here that contradicted the narrative he was creating, one where I had been central to his success, not a decorative footnote. I worked systematically, day and night, fueled by a cold, clear anger that was so much more useful than the messy grief I had been drowning in. Jasmine would find me still at the kitchen table in the morning, surrounded by notes and printouts. "You're kind of scaring me," she admitted one morning, setting a cup of coffee beside my laptop. "When was the last time you slept?" "I'll sleep when I'm done," I replied, not looking up from the contract I was reviewing. "Done with what exactly?" she pressed. "Elena, revenge isn't going to help you move on." I finally looked at her. This isn't about revenge. This is about justice, and it's about survival. Victor didn't just leave me. Jasmine. He's trying to erase me completely. If I don't fight back, I'll have nothing, not even my reputation. She didn't argue further, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She didn't understand yet that the woman I had been before, the one who put everyone else's needs above her own, was gone. I had been reborn in pain and betrayal, and this new version of me was not going to lie down and die just because Victor Sterling had decided she should. A week into my project, I realized I needed more information than I currently had access to. Victor had been careful to limit my involvement in certain aspects of the business, particularly in the last year as he'd presumably planned his exit strategy from our marriage. There were gaps in my knowledge that needed to be filled. I thought of Thomas Reeves, Victor's former business partner from the early days of Sterling Properties. Victor had forced him out 5 years ago in a move that had shocked everyone in their professional circle. The official story was that Thomas had wanted to take the company in a different direction, but I had always suspected there was more to it. Thomas had disappeared from our lives so completely afterward that I knew Victor must have threatened him in some way. Finding Thomas wasn't easy. He had left the city after the buyout, and Victor had made sure his name was rarely mentioned in company circles. But after some digging through old contacts and social media, I discovered he was now running a small real estate consultancy in a coastal town 3 hours away. I made the drive on a Tuesday, rehearsing what I would say to a man who likely hated anything associated with the Sterling name. His office was modest but tasteful, housed in a converted Victorian home near the town's main street. The receptionist looked surprised when I gave my name. "Mrs. Sterling, let me see if Mr. Reeves is available." I waited nervously, wondering if Thomas would refuse to see me. But minutes later, the receptionist returned and led me to his office. Thomas had aged in the 5 years since I'd last seen him. His hair was grayer, his face more lined, but his eyes were still sharp and assessing as they took me in. "Elena Sterling," he said, not rising from behind his desk. "This is unexpected." "Actually, it's just Elena now," I replied. "Or it will be soon. Victor and I are divorcing." Something flickered in Thomas's expression. Not quite satisfaction, but close. "I heard rumors." "Please, sit down. What brings you all this way?" "I doubt it's to reminisce about old times." I decided honesty was my only option. "I need your help. Victor is trying to cut me out of everything we built together. He's claiming I was never really involved in the company, that my contributions were minimal." Thomas laughed, a short, harsh sound. "That sounds familiar. When he forced me out, he rewrote company history to make it seem like I had just been along for the ride. Classic Victor." "Then you understand why I'm here," I said. "I need to know what really happened between you two. And I need to know if there's anything in Victor's business practices that I should be aware of." Thomas studied me for a long moment. "Why should I help you? You stood by him when he pushed me out. You were at his side at every event afterward. The perfect, supportive wife." The accusation stung because it contained truth. I had believed Victor's version of events, or at least I had convinced myself to believe it because it was easier than considering the alternative. "I was wrong," I said simply. "I didn't ask the right questions then. I trusted my husband over my own instincts. That was my mistake, and I've paid for it. But now I need to understand what I'm really dealing with." Thomas leaned back in his chair, considering. Finally, he opened a drawer and pulled out a flash drive. I always knew Victor would self-destruct eventually, he said, placing the drive on the desk between us. His kind always does. Too much ambition, too little conscience. When he forced me out, I made copies of certain documents just in case. Insurance, you might say. What's on it? I asked, not reaching for it yet. Evidence that Victor has been cutting corners from the beginning. Environmental assessments that were ignored. Building code violations that were covered up with bribes. Tax irregularities that would interest the IRS considerably. Thomas's smile was cold. I never used it because he threatened to destroy my reputation if I came forward. At the time, I had a daughter in college and elderly parents to support. I couldn't risk it. I picked up the flash drive, feeling its weight in my palm. And now? Now, my daughter has graduated and my parents are gone. And frankly, I'd enjoy seeing Victor get what's coming to him. Thomas leaned forward. But Elena, if you use any of this, be prepared. Victor fights dirty. He'll come after you with everything he has. I nodded, slipping the drive into my purse. Thank you. I know the risks. Back at Jasmine's apartment, I spent hours going through the files Thomas had given me. What I found was worse than I had imagined. Victor hadn't just bent rules, he had broken laws. The Sterling Tower, his legacy project, was particularly troubling. The environmental impact report had been falsified, showing the land was safe when in fact, there were serious concerns about soil contamination. Building permits had been obtained through bribes to city officials. Tax documents showed evidence of fraud on a scale that took my breath away. I sat back, my mind racing. This was not just about my divorce anymore. This was about stopping Victor before his greed and corruption hurt more people. The Sterling Tower was set to house dozens of businesses, hundreds of workers. What if the structural shortcuts he had taken led to disaster? The realization came to me with perfect clarity. I wouldn't destroy Victor out of vengeance, but I would expose him out of duty. Not just to myself, but to everyone who could be harmed by his ruthless pursuit of wealth and power. This wasn't about being a victim anymore. This was about being a whistleblower, about holding a powerful man accountable. For the first time since finding Victor with Margot, I felt something like purpose fill the hollow spaces inside me. I had been reborn, not as a wounded ex-wife seeking revenge, but as a woman with the knowledge and determination to right a serious wrong. Victor thought I was too weak to fight back. He was about to discover how badly he had underestimated me. My first call was to Rebecca Chen, a former colleague from my finance days. We had stayed loosely in touch over the years, occasionally meeting for lunch when our busy schedules aligned. When I explained I was looking to re-enter the workforce, she didn't ask about Victor or the divorce, which I appreciated. The firm would be lucky to have you back, she said, genuine warmth in her voice. Your analytical skills were always top-notch. How soon can you come in for a meeting? It felt strange walking into the offices of Mercer Financial after so many years away. The company had expanded, moved to a sleeker building downtown, but there were familiar faces who greeted me with surprised smiles. No one mentioned Victor directly, though I caught the occasional whisper as I passed by. News traveled fast in our professional circles. Rebecca introduced me to the current team as one of the brightest analysts we ever had, making no reference to my years as Mrs. Sterling. By the end of the meeting, I had a consulting contract that would allow me to work flexible hours while rebuilding my career. The salary was modest compared to the lifestyle I had grown accustomed to, but it represented something far more valuable: independence. With a legitimate income source established, I turned my attention to gathering more evidence about Victor's business practices. I worked carefully, methodically, always conscious that Victor had eyes everywhere in the city. I used public records requests to obtain building permits and property transfers. I researched the names of officials who had approved Victor's more questionable projects, noting patterns of sudden retirements or unexplained windfalls. I was building a case piece by piece, but I knew better than to keep all this explosive information in one place. I stored copies in secure cloud accounts, left encrypted backups with trusted friends, and kept physical copies in a safety deposit box opened under my maiden name. Throughout this process, I maintained a low profile. I avoided social media, declined invitations to events where Victor might be present, and asked Jasmine to be discreet about my activities. I didn't want him to have any hint that I was doing more than simply licking my wounds. It was during this quiet period of information gathering that I stumbled upon the most shocking discovery yet. While reviewing old incorporation documents, for Sterling Properties, I noticed discrepancies in the initial funding sources. Victor had always claimed he built the company from scratch with a small inheritance and a lot of hard work. The story was central to his public image as a self-made success. But the numbers didn't add up. The initial capital investment was far larger than the inheritance he'd mentioned, and it had come from an offshore account that, with some digging, I traced back to a holding company registered in my family's name. My father had been a successful investment banker before his early death when I was in college. I had inherited his estate but had been too grief-stricken to do more than sign the paperwork the family attorney had prepared. Victor and I had met shortly after, and he had offered to help me manage my inheritance, claiming his business background made him better equipped to handle such matters. Had he stolen from me? The thought was so outrageous that at first I dismissed it. But as I dug deeper, following the money trail through a maze of transfers and shell companies, the truth became undeniable. Victor had used my inheritance to fund the start of Sterling Properties, then systematically cut me off from my family's financial advisors, convincing me they were trying to control me. I sat at Jasmine's kitchen table, surrounded by financial records, feeling physically ill. Victor hadn't just betrayed me as a husband. He had defrauded me from the very beginning of our relationship. Our entire marriage had been built on a foundation of lies and theft. As the shock subsided, a cold, clear anger took its place. If I had needed any further confirmation that my cause was just, this was it. Victor Sterling was going to face consequences, not just for how he had treated me, but for the criminal he truly was. The next morning, I received a text message from an unknown number. "Back off, you're out of your depth." No name, no further explanation needed. Victor had somehow caught wind that I was poking around his business affairs. I stared at the message, my heart racing despite my attempts to stay calm. How had he known? Had I been careless somewhere, left a digital footprint he could trace? Or did he simply have more eyes and ears in the city than I had accounted for? I showed the message to Jasmine, who immediately suggested calling the police. But what would I tell them? That my soon-to-be ex-husband had sent me a vague text? They would dismiss it as divorce drama, especially given Victor's standing in the community and the rumors about my mental stability. No, I couldn't rely on official channels, not yet. I would need to be even more careful moving forward, more strategic. I changed my phone number, started using public computers for my research, and varied my routines to make it harder for anyone to track my movements. Despite these precautions, I felt Victor's invisible pressure growing. A source at the city planning office who had been providing me with documents suddenly stopped returning my calls. A former Sterling Properties employee who had agreed to speak with me about questionable practices canceled our meeting at the last minute, citing a misunderstanding. The final blow came when my lawyer, Diana Martin, called to tell me she could no longer represent me in the divorce. "I'm sorry, Elena," she said, her voice tight with what sounded like genuine regret. "A conflict of interest has arisen that makes it impossible for me to continue as your counsel." "What conflict?" I demanded. "You've never represented Victor." There was a pause. "I can't discuss the details, but I've provided a list of other attorneys who might be able to help you. I recommend contacting them as soon as possible. The preliminary hearing is in 3 weeks." I didn't need her to spell it out. Victor had gotten to her somehow, either through threats or inducements. I was now without legal representation at a critical juncture in the divorce proceedings. For a moment, I felt the panic rising, threatening to overwhelm the calm determination I had been cultivating. It would be so easy to give up, to take the insulting settlement Victor had offered and try to rebuild my life far away from his influence. Many women in my position would have done exactly that. But giving up would mean letting him win, letting him continue to harm others through his corrupt business practices. It would mean accepting that powerful men could simply erase the women who helped build them up when those women became inconvenient. It would mean betraying the woman I had become in the ashes of his betrayal. Instead of succumbing to fear, I channeled it into renewed purpose. I went back to my spreadsheets, my documents, my growing case against Victor Sterling. I had been naive before, thinking I could maintain complete secrecy in my investigation. Now I understood that this would be a battle fought in the open, with Victor using every resource at his disposal to silence me. So be it. If he wanted war, I would give him one, but it would be fought on my terms, with weapons he didn't expect and at a time of my choosing. I had been underestimated my entire marriage. Victor had mistaken my support for weakness, my compromise for lack of backbone. He thought I was too weak to fight back, too broken by his betrayal to pose any real threat. In 3 weeks, at the IIA preliminary divorce hearing, he would begin to understand just how wrong he was. I found Sofia Mendez through a women's legal advocacy group. Unlike Diana, who had been respected but cautious, Sofia was known for being relentless in high-profile divorce cases. She had built her reputation representing women whose wealthy husbands thought they could discard them without consequence. "I've been following your situation," Sofia said when we met in her downtown office. "Victor Sterling's tactics are textbook. Wealthy narcissist. Create a false narrative about mental instability. Isolate the spouse from support. Systems, hide assets, then offer an insultingly low settlement while acting generous." Her bluntness was refreshing after weeks of carefully worded conversations and veiled threats. "Can you help me?" I asked, not bothering to hide the desperation in my voice. Sofia smiled, a sharp expression that reminded me of a predator spotting prey. "Oh, I can do more than help you, Elena. I can make sure Victor Sterling regrets the day he decided to cross you." She took my case on contingency, meaning she would only get paid if we won. It was a vote of confidence that brought tears to my eyes. Someone believed me. Someone with power and influence was on my side. Over the next 2 weeks, Sofia and I prepared for the preliminary hearing. We gathered financial records, documented Victor's attempts at intimidation, and compiled evidence of my contributions to Sterling Properties. Sofia advised against revealing the more serious findings about Victor's business practices just yet. "We need to focus on securing your financial future first," she explained. "The criminal issues will come later, when we have ensured you're protected." Meanwhile, I worked on another front. Using a secure email account, I reached out to Patricia Torres, an investigative journalist known for her hard-hitting exposés on corporate corruption. I didn't reveal everything I knew in that first message, just enough to pique her interest. "I have documentation of serious regulatory violations and possible criminal activity by Sterling Properties, particularly regarding their flagship Sterling Tower project," I wrote. "If you're interested in pursuing this story, I can provide evidence that has never been made public." Patricia responded within hours, suggesting we meet at a quiet cafe on the other side of town. Before sharing any documents with her, I had her sign a confidentiality agreement Sofia had prepared, protecting my identity as the source until I was ready to go public. Patricia's eyes widened as she reviewed the files I provided, a carefully curated selection that proved my claims without revealing the full extent of what I knew. "This is explosive," she said finally, looking up at me. "The environmental report alone would be enough to halt construction on the Sterling Tower. Add in the bribery evidence and the tax issues, and we're talking about potential criminal charges." "I'm aware," I replied, "but I need to be strategic about when this information becomes public. The timing has to be right." Patricia studied me, professional curiosity evident in her gaze. "This isn't just about exposing corruption, is it? This is personal for you." I met her eyes steadily. "Does that make the evidence any less valid?" "No," she admitted, "but it does make me curious about your endgame." "Justice," I said simply, "for myself and for everyone else Victor has hurt. Or will hurt if he's not stopped." Patricia agreed to hold the story until I gave her the go-ahead, in exchange for exclusive access to additional documents and my first-hand account when the time came. It was a fair arrangement, one that gave me leverage without compromising the integrity of her reporting. With these pieces in place, I turned my attention to the final, most critical element of my plan. The day before the preliminary hearing, I visited a private lab carrying a small envelope containing strands of hair I had collected from my hairbrush before leaving the penthouse. The hairs were not mine. "I need a DNA test," I told the technician. "I have material from the father. I'm providing the maternal sample." The technician nodded, handing me the necessary forms. Results take 3 to 5 business days. Will that be soon enough? It will have to be, I replied, signing the paperwork with steady hands. That night, I couldn't sleep. Tomorrow would set everything in motion, a cascade of events that could not be stopped once begun. I stood at Jasmine's kitchen window, staring out at the city lights, wondering if Victor was awake too, confident in his victory, never suspecting what was coming. I thought about the woman I had been when we met, young and grief-stricken after my father's death, vulnerable to Victor's particular brand of charm. I thought about the years I had spent supporting his dreams, subjugating my own ambitions, believing we were building something together. I thought about finding him with Margot, the casual cruelty of his dismissal, the systematic way he had tried to erase me. Mostly, I thought about the woman I had become in the crucible of his betrayal. Stronger, clearer, uncompromising in a way I had never allowed myself to be before. Victor thought I was too weak to fight back. By the time this was over, the whole world would know how wrong he had been. The preliminary hearing was held in a small courtroom on the 3rd floor of the county courthouse. I arrived early with Sophia, who looked formidable in a sharply tailored suit, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Remember," she murmured as we took our seats, "let him think he's winning. The more confident he is, the harder he'll fall." Victor arrived with his attorney, Harold Berkman, a divorce lawyer known for representing the city's wealthiest men. Behind them came Margot, her presence completely inappropriate for a legal proceeding, but perfectly in character for a woman who enjoyed flaunting her victory. Victor looked startled when he saw me, as if he had expected me not to show up, or perhaps to appear disheveled and broken. Instead, I sat straight-backed in a conservative blue dress, my face composed, meeting his gaze directly for the first time since discovering his betrayal. His eyes narrowed slightly before he turned away, leaning to whisper something to his lawyer. Margot stared at me with undisguised contempt, one hand resting protectively over her stomach in a gesture that confirmed what I had begun to suspect. She was pregnant. The hearing proceeded as expected at first. Victor's lawyer presented their insulting settlement offer as if it were the height of generosity. He emphasized my lack of professional contributions to Sterling Properties and suggested that my emotional instability made it inadvisable for me to have any ongoing connection to the company. When it was Sophia's turn to speak, she rose slowly, arranging her papers with deliberate care. "Your Honor, before we address the proposed settlement, we need to correct several misrepresentations regarding my client's role in Sterling Properties," she began. Far from being an uninvolved spouse, Elena Sterling was instrumental in the company's growth from its inception. She presented a detailed timeline of my contributions, supported by emails, meeting minutes, and testimonials from several former employees who had agreed to make statements despite Victor's influence. As she spoke, I watched Victor's face harden, his confident smirk giving way to a tight-lipped anger. "Furthermore," Sophia continued, "we have reason to believe that significant marital assets have been concealed or transferred in anticipation of these proceedings, in clear violation of disclosure requirements." She handed a thick folder to the judge and Victor's lawyer. "This preliminary financial analysis shows discrepancies that warrant a full forensic accounting of Sterling Properties and Mr. Sterling's personal accounts." The judge, an older woman, with shrewd eyes, flipped through the documents with interest. "These allegations are concerning, Ms. Mendez. Mr. Berkman, does your client wish to respond?" Victor's lawyer looked rattled, clearly not having anticipated this level of preparation from my side. He requested a brief recess to confer with his client, which the judge granted. As they huddled in whispered consultation across the courtroom, Sophia leaned close to me. "We've got him on the defensive. That's exactly where we want him." When the hearing resumed, Victor's lawyer adopted a conciliatory tone, suggesting that perhaps there had been some confusion about my role in the company and offering to revisit the settlement terms to reflect a more collaborative understanding of our marriage. It was a tactical retreat, designed to buy time and limit damage. The judge ordered a full financial disclosure from both parties and scheduled another hearing in 30 days. As we prepared to leave, I felt Victor's eyes boring into me from across the room. Outside the courthouse, he cornered me while Sophia was speaking with the court clerk. What do you think you're doing? He hissed, keeping his voice low. You can't win this, Elena. You might have found yourself a shark lawyer, but I own this town. Back off now, and I might still be generous. Keep pushing and you'll get nothing. I looked at him calmly. This man I had once loved, now revealed as a stranger. I don't want your generosity, Victor. I want justice. His face darkened. Be careful what you wish for. As he stalked away, Margot at his side, I felt a strange sense of peace. The first phase of my plan was complete. Victor was angry, off balance, and most importantly, completely unaware of what was still to come. The real reckoning hadn't even begun. The Sterling Tower Gala was the social event of the season. Victor had spared no expense, transforming the construction site into a glittering wonderland of lights, champagne fountains, and ice sculptures. The city's elite had turned out in force, eager to associate themselves with what was being touted as the crown jewel of downtown development. From the backseat of my town car, I watched the glitterati arrive, women in designer gowns, men in tailored tuxedos, all air-kissing and posturing beneath the temporary lighting that made the half-finished building look magical rather than menacing. My hands smoothed down the fabric of my own gown, a deep emerald that brought out the green in my eyes and clung to the curves I had rediscovered during weeks of proper meals and regular exercise. My hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, my makeup flawless but subtle. I looked nothing like the broken woman who had fled the boardroom in tears months ago. Ready? Jasmine asked from beside me, looking equally stunning, in midnight blue. I nodded, taking a deep breath. As ready as I'll ever be. We had timed our arrival for maximum impact, just as most guests would be gathered, but before Victor's scheduled speech. As we stepped from the car, I felt heads turn, conversations stutter to a halt. My name rippled through the crowd in whispered exclamations of surprise. Elena Sterling. Here. Now. I moved through the throng with practiced grace, accepting flutes of champagne, nodding at familiar faces that registered shock, curiosity, even grudging respect. No one had expected me to show up at Victor's triumph, least of all Victor himself. I spotted him across the room, holding court among a circle of investors. Margot stood beside him in a cream-colored gown that highlighted her small but visible baby bump. They looked like the perfect power couple, blessed by success and impending parenthood. Until Victor saw me. His face went through a rapid succession of expressions. Disbelief, anger, then a forced smile that never reached his eyes. He excused himself from his group and made his way toward me, Margot trailing behind him like an anxious shadow. Elena, he said, his voice carrying just enough warmth to maintain appearances. This is unexpected. Is it? I replied, matching his public smile with one of my own. I wouldn't miss the unveiling of the Sterling Tower. After all, the original concept was mine, wasn't it? His smile tightened. I'm surprised you'd want to be here, given our circumstances. Our circumstances, I repeated, letting my gaze drift to Margot's belly. Yes, quite a lot has happened since you decided our marriage was inconvenient for your ambitions. Around us, guests were pretending not to listen while straining to catch every word. Victor was acutely aware of the audience, as was I. Perhaps we should speak privately, he suggested, a hint of threat beneath the polite words. Oh, I don't think that's necessary, I replied lightly. I just came to witness your moment of glory. Don't let me keep you from your guests. I turned and walked away before he could respond, feeling his eyes burning into my back. Phase 1. Complete. Victor was rattled, wondering why I was there, what I might say or do to disrupt his perfect night. I circulated through the party, accepting condolences from those who had ignored me during the divorce, fielding curious questions with enigmatic smiles. All the while, I was waiting, watching the entrance for a sign that the next phase was underway. It came just as Victor was preparing to give his speech, ascending the temporary stage that had been erected in what would eventually be the building's grand lobby. A commotion at the entrance drew attention away from him, the crowd parting to reveal several men and women in dark suits with unmistakable federal badges displayed. At the same moment, my phone vibrated with a text from Patricia. Story just went live, all major outlets picking it up. Victor was at the microphone, trying to recapture his audience's attention, when a tall woman approached the stage, official credentials in hand. The federal agent spoke quietly to him, but in the sudden hush that had fallen over the party, her words carried. "Mr. Sterling, we have a warrant to search these premises and all Sterling Properties offices in connection with an investigation into violations of environmental regulations, tax fraud, and bribery of public officials." The murmurs that swept through the crowd were like music to my ears. Victor's face drained of color, then flushed with rage as his eyes found mine across the room. I met his gaze steadily, letting him see the truth in my expression. This was my doing. "This is ridiculous," he blustered into the microphone. "Some kind of mistake, a misunderstanding that will be cleared up immediately." But his words fell on increasingly distracted ears as guests pulled out their phones, alerted by news notifications about the breaking scandal. Patricia's exposé was comprehensive and damning, backed by the evidence I had provided and her own meticulous reporting. "Sterling Tower built on fraud and bribes," the headlines proclaimed. "Federal investigation into real estate mogul's empire." What happened next unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. As federal agents began cordoning off areas of the construction site, serving papers to stunned Sterling Properties executives, a separate drama was playing out near the stage. A young woman in a conservative suit approached Victor, handing him an envelope as Margot looked on in confusion. I recognized her as a process server from Sophia's firm. From my position across the room, I couldn't hear the exchange, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was in that envelope. DNA test results confirming that the baby Margot carried was indeed Victor's, along with legal papers demanding paternity acknowledgement and appropriate financial support. It was the coup de grace, timed to coincide with the public revelation of his business fraud. In one devastating evening, both pillars of Victor's carefully constructed image, his business acumen and his new beginning with Margot, were under attack. Guests began leaving in droves, not wanting to be associated with the unfolding scandal. Investors huddled in corners, frantically making calls. Reporters who had come to cover a glamorous event found themselves in the middle of a breaking news story. Through it all, I remained calm, sipping champagne as I watched Victor's world implode. He fought his way through the chaos toward me, face contorted with fury. "You did this!" he snarled, all pretense of civility abandoned. "You vindictive bitch." "No, Victor," I replied evenly. "You did this. I just made sure everyone knew the truth." "You think this is over?" he demanded. "You think you've won? I'll destroy you for this." I smiled, genuinely amused by his delusion. "With what power, exactly? Your company is under federal investigation. Your assets will be frozen. Your investors are already running for the exits. And that's before we even get to the matter of how you used my inheritance to start Sterling Properties in the first place." His face went slack with shock. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, I know everything, Victor. Every lie, every theft, every betrayal, from the very beginning." I leaned closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. "You should have known I was never the weak one." I left him standing there, surrounded by the ruins of his empire, and made my way to the exit. Jasmine fell into step beside me, squeezing my arm in silent support. Outside, the night air was cool against my flushed skin. Camera flashes erupted as reporters recognized me, shouting questions about the scandal. I paused, considering. This moment had been months in the making. "Ms. Sterling, what can you tell us about the allegations against your ex-husband?" "I trust the federal investigation will reveal the full extent of the wrongdoing at Sterling Properties," I said calmly. "My only concern has been ensuring that the truth comes to light, for the sake of everyone affected by these violations." "Are you behind the whistleblower reports?" I smiled enigmatically. I believe in justice. Sometimes it arrives in unexpected ways. 6 months later, I sat on a bench outside the courthouse, watching fallen leaves skitter across the plaza. The criminal cases against Victor were proceeding slowly, but the civil penalties had already been substantial. Sterling Properties was in receivership, its assets being sold off to pay fines and settlements. The Sterling Tower project had been halted indefinitely, deemed unsafe due to the shortcuts taken in its construction. Victor had been forced to resign in disgrace. The divorce had been finalized on terms that reflected my true contributions to the company. Most satisfying of all, my name had been restored to the founding documents of the business my money had helped create. With my settlement, I had established the Sterling Accountability Foundation, dedicated to helping victims of real estate fraud and advocating for stricter oversight of development projects. It was a fitting transformation of Victor's legacy into something that would actually benefit the community. I was so lost in thought that I almost didn't notice him approaching until his shadow fell across me. Victor looked nothing like the confident tycoon he had once been. His designer suits had given way to off-the-rack clothes. His carefully maintained tan had faded, and new lines had etched themselves into his face. "Elena," he said, his voice lacking its former authority. I looked up at him calmly. "Victor, how is your hearing?" He grimaced. "Another delay. My new lawyer says they're dragging it out deliberately." "That sounds familiar," I replied, remembering how he had tried to wear me down during our divorce. Victor hesitated, then sat on the bench beside me, uninvited. "You know, I've had a lot of time to think. Maybe I underestimated you." "Maybe?" I raised an eyebrow. He attempted a shadow of his old charming smile. "Definitely. You've proven how capable you are. In fact, I've been wondering if we might be able to work something out. A partnership of sorts. With your foundation and my experience, we could rebuild something together." I stared at him, momentarily speechless at his audacity. Even now, facing criminal charges, his empire in ruins, his reputation shredded, Victor still believed in his own invincibility, still thought he could manipulate me. "Victor," I said finally, rising from the bench, "you should have known I was never the weak one. But your real mistake was thinking I would ever be foolish enough to trust you twice." I walked away. Without looking back, toward the future I was building on my own terms. Behind me lay the wreckage of a man who had underestimated me, who had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my support for submission. His empire had crumbled, just as I had promised, and from its ruins I had emerged stronger than ever before.